Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those joining us from any of the European time zones. This is the sixth session in our bi-monthly SG Declares and Shares series, and our first special and collaborative session with the Singapore Institute of Architects. Thank you, SIA. In the way of a very brief introduction, Construction Declares is an online petition uniting all strands of construction and the built environment around the agenda of climate and biodiversity crisis which we are facing. It started in May 2019, almost 2 years ago now, and now has over 9,200 signatories in various disciplines and in 27 countries across the globe. The numbers of professionals engaged in the signatory companies hover around 1 million employees. The movement is only 2 years old, and it is continuously growing. In early January 2020, about a year and a half ago, Singapore joined the movement with both Singapore architects and Singapore structural engineers signing the declaration. In June 2020, we set up the Singapore and the Global Environmental Consultants Declare platform. This means that any environmental consultant across the globe who wish to join will be helped by us in Singapore. About the same time, the Singapore landscape architects joined. We now have a total of 54 Singapore-based signatories with over 50,000 professionals working in the signatory companies. Now, when in January 20 we launched the Singapore chapter, we shared a matrix describing the levels of engagement with the environmental agenda. Our Singapore Construction Declares team have since developed that into what is called the climate sculpture. I will take the next couple of minutes to present this work, which is a work in progress, before our keynote speaker and our moderators engage with us. A climate sculpture, back in January 2020, we identified various levels of engagement with the environmental agenda as in the launch of the Singapore chapter. The levels of engagement that we had identified then started at the lowest level, being denial, where it's about people who totally deny the existence of any environmental issues, any climate crisis, etc. Unfortunately, as of now, as you probably know, we have a few presidents of various countries in that category. That is the lowest level of engagement for us. The next level is ignorance, where people are not aware of any such issues. The next level is awareness. The level above that would be awareness plus advocacy. And as we go higher up in these levels of engagements, we become greener and greener, obviously. So awareness plus advocacy plus action. Awareness plus advocacy plus action plus an organized way of engagement with the agenda. And the highest two, one is the awareness plus advocacy plus action plus organizing and plus engagement with policymakers, whether it is in a company or in a neighborhood or in a country. And the highest level we identified was awareness plus advocacy plus action plus organization plus policymakers engagement and legislation. At that level, we legislate against damaging the environment. So it becomes illegal to damage the environment. If you reach that level, then everybody will be covered. Even the deniers would have to comply, which in this category we identified as the highest levels of engagement. What we then suggested was that we all need to see as individuals, as companies, as neighborhoods, as countries, where we are in this matrix and aim to move one level up at least. This is the work which was done. And since then, our team have gone through 6 countries and seen, based on surveys and response to questions which are publicly available, they have created what we call the climate sculpture. In this category, you see, for instance, for Singapore, that there are 2.5% of people do not believe in climate change. So we'll be putting them on the denials. About 2.5% are unaware of the term climate change. We're putting them under ignorance in terms of the agenda. 4% have awareness, are aware that it can disrupt the ecosystem. 16% support in making low carbon economy, and 70%, which is a huge number, can bear or prepared to pay an extra cost and inconvenience in order to deal with the agenda. The remaining 5%, there is no data available, but our team have broken it down into 2.5%, 1.5%, and 1% for the three top levels. Corresponding numbers for Canada is like this. You know, there's a staggering 12% are denials. They do not believe in climate change, and etc. as per these numbers that go up. In the USA, the bottom portion, which is not the ideal end to be in, is highly bottom heavy. 14% denials, and add up to about over 50% are either just aware or are not even aware of it. That is a huge numbers. India is unfortunately sort of seems to be similar to the US with these numbers. China has a large 43% of people who are aware, but maybe they're not prepared to do anything about it. Europe, as in Germany, is almost everybody is conscious of the situation, and only 1% fall in the ignorant group category. The rest are sort of bottom, lower to the bottom of the range, heavy. 47% support some sort of an action to ban products which damage the environment. So the climate sculpture comes from here, where our team have put it together in a three-dimensional format. At the moment, at least in a work in progress, we're saying that the ideal situation is something like this, where it is like a T, where high engagement with the legislators and policymakers, etc. But there's always going to be people in the middle. And definitely, this is the sort of picture that we don't want to have, where a huge number of people who are denials, which fortunately none of the countries and places that we've looked at has that. So going back to build up our sculpture, Singapore is a plus, is a sort of reasonably good one. Canada is a sort of double plus. USA is bottom heavy, not very good. India, not much better than the US, surprisingly. China is sort of bottom to middle heavy, and Germany is, which is a representative of the EU in those surveys, it looks like this. So that is the sculpture that we are having at the moment, and it's what one needs to try and push the bulk of the load up to the top tier. The last thing that I have to share here for the work that's done by our team, by the team here, is that even within a country, of course, we've given the average of US, which is like this, but each, Virginia is even more bottom heavy. New York is very similar to the average, is not much better than the average of the US. Oklahoma, bottom heavy. California, very similar to the average. So the question, I suppose, that the last slide I have been given to share with you is, can we use the climate sculpture perhaps to help identify and target our clienteles, to discuss the issue with them, to engage with them in the agenda of the environment, or can it push the agenda of climate change up to a higher engagement level with the team and the client? And the last question, can the climate sculpture facilitate to streamline the roadmap of combating climate change? So work in progress. We hope to share with you as work comes through. Any of this information that anybody wants to use to share, or if you want more information, by all means connect with us, and we will share that with you. Now, this is done, and we now go to the main feature of the day. Our keynote speaker for this session, which is Ms. Hwang Yu-Ning, Chief Planner of Singapore and Deputy CEO of Urban Redevelopment Authority, URA, in Singapore. highly engaged with policy making, of course, and it becomes very, very relevant to our climate sculpture right at the top of the range. Yu-Ning has graciously accepted our invitation to join this session to give us a policymaker's view on the environment under the heading of, for the long term, planning for a sustainable city. Now, without further ado, I pass the session to our brave moderator, Razvan Ghilic-Micu. For those of you who may not know him, Razvan is an architect with Hassel, an educator at NUS, and a strong advocate for resilient design. He's the chief editor of the Singapore Architect magazine, and he's recently appointed by the SIA, Singapore Institute of Architects, as the festival director of this year's ArchiFest. Razvan, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Hossein. It is really my pleasure and privilege to moderate today's event. Obviously, a prominent leader of our urban environment, our keynote speaker, Ms. Hwang Yu-Ning, really needs no introduction, but I'm going to obviously give one anyhow. As a chief planner and deputy CEO of URA, Ms. Hwang oversees the urban planning and conservation of built heritage in Singapore. Prior to this, she had served various roles in Singapore's public service, including the Prime Minister's Office Strategy Group and also the Ministry of National Development. Ms. Hwang is a global governing trustee with the Urban Land Institute. She's also a board member of Singapore Science Centre and the Land Transport Authority. Currently, she serves on the National University of Singapore School of Design and Environment Advisory Committee. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on planning long-term for a sustainable city. So Yu-Ning, please feel free to share your screen and take it from here.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Razvan. Let me just put the slide back on the full screen mode. Suddenly couldn't find my unmute button. Sorry about that. Dr. Hossein, thanks for the invitation. Lovely to be here. Let me just run back to the first slide. Oops, I'm going backwards on this. So you can get a quick preview for those of you who have to go off. Well, thanks for having me here. Very happy to speak about how we approach planning in Singapore. This is a view that's common to many of us. This is taken from the MARINA barrage. Nice day out. But it's not very long ago that we were like this. So Singapore in the 1960s, as some of us had lived through it, we were struggling back then with unemployment, slums, etc. So I guess the question is, how did we get here? And I think suffice to say that we do put a lot of emphasis on planning and planning for the long term. And much of this stems from the constraints that we face as a nation with land constraints that we have. You see a quick comparison of London, New York City, Hong Kong at the bottom. And you can quickly appreciate how small Singapore is if you haven't yet already. And sometimes I tell visitors who come to URA to see us that, Singapore is a marathon across east to west and half marathon north to south, if you want a kind of more physical example of how small we are. And we are not just a city, we are a country as well. So we do have to, in a way, accommodate much of the land needs, much of the sea needs within the confines of our boundaries. And I would say that sustainability and stewardship are really at the core of our planning approach. We try to balance the social, economic environment within the confines of our limited land and sea space. And we're also looking to make sure that we plan for flexibility and resilience given the many rise of disruptive technology, unanticipated needs, etc., and of course, climate change. Now, our planning process provides a framework which is a focus on achieving long-term enduring benefits And this is evident by the way that the long-term plan at the top of this chart kind of undergirds the whole planning approach. This is an integrated land use and transportation plan looking 30 to 50 years down the road and really trying to map out what are the possible issues and possible strategies that we need to take. And the long-term plan gets translated into the master plan, which is a statutory plan guiding our development. And these are then further implemented through development coordination land sales, as well as guided via development control. And I would say the magic is not really in the plan, because some people do, when they see me and come to URA to talk to me, ask, no, in that sense, what has worked for Singapore? And I tell them that it's not the plan per se. I believe it's the planning process, because this plan is not static. It is reviewed regularly, like you see here in the chart. Long-term plan is reviewed every 10 years, and the medium-term plan is reviewed every 5 years. And it's not just URA cooking the plans internally within the agency, but we are working across government, working with stakeholders, working with the public to kind of develop the plan to understand what the issues. And this fosters a habit in a way of thinking and planning ahead. So it helps us stretch our thinking, as well as push us to consider long-term issues and understand the trade-offs. Now, what better example than to look at the first concept plan that was done as part of this long-term plan. And this was started in 1967 with the help of the United Nations Development Program Office coming in to support us with experts. And much of what you see on this plan is manifested in the Singapore that we know of today, having Changi Airport in the east, our Jurong Industrial Estates, as well as the various roads and towns across Singapore, as well as the central catchment. And the long-term plan provides a roadmap for various agencies they are developing. So it's very helpful to have this as a strategy going ahead, but it's also not static, as I mentioned. And in the early days when the UN team was here, I think it was very fortuitous that we also had a local team working alongside the United Nations team to, in a way, learn from them, and then to be able to take the plan going forward. Because plans, as we all know, things change and we need to adjust the plans. So we had a local team that was able to then bring the process forward and continue with the regular review of the plans. Now here's the Master Plan 2019, which highlights some of the key strategies and approaches, and it highlights the planning intent for the next 10 to 15 years, flashing out the details and the strategy. And you can see, as contrasted with the concept plan, this is a lot more detail, a lot more fine-grained, because it provides information on what needs to be done parcel by parcel, and in terms of the plans that need to be developed. So it gives guidance for the parcel level development in terms of permissible use, as well as the intensity that it can be developed for. And through long-term planning, we are able to realize a lot of these key strategies, whether it's about recycling, reusing our land. Here's a picture of Old Tanjong Rhu. Some of you might remember it as a shipyard, ship repair. And a fun fact is that the Benjamin Shears Bridge is so high because back then the ships need to navigate into Kallang Basin for the ship repair to take place. So it does provide a beautiful vantage point of, as you drive into the city, to look at the whole Marina Bay as well as the CBD. So that's kind of an interesting thing that happened, because the old shipyard was there in Tanjong Rhu, but over time, the area was recycled and replanned as a residential area that you know today. And we've also been trying to safeguard our natural capital and heritage, as well as optimize the use of our land, including underground spaces like the Jurong Rock Cavern. And co-location of compatible users is a strategy that we've also been trying to push. So East Coast, the 4-in-1 rail and bus depot, is the world's first 4-in-1 rail and bus depot of trying to combine so many functions into one facility. of course, we all know other community facilities like our Tampines Hub and many more examples of Singapore, where we try to co-locate compatible users that not just end up serving land, but provide new models of serving the public as well. Here's an example that I want to bring you through very quickly on how the long-term planning helped in the Marina Bay. So this idea was seeded early on, and reclamation works, as you see from the picture here, CBD is there in the backdrop. And there was a lot of reclamation works in the foreground. And here is Marina Bay as you know it today. But interestingly enough, much of the reclamation was initially intended to support the East Coast Parkway construction. East Coast Parkway is an expressway that ran across from probably this point to here. And then the reclamation plans were expanded in the 70s to accommodate the city's expansion. And we continue to look for opportunities to reclaim further to safeguard the area as a land bank. And here are two differing master plan schemes that were developed by Mr. Kenzo Tange and Mr. I.M. Pei to help guide the planners in terms of what are the possible options that we wanted to consider for developing the area in the long term. And if you come to the URA Center, the City Gallery, you'll be able to see these models on display. And these plans were developed in the 80s. Mr. Tange's plan was a radial plan that has a bold sweeping skyline. And Mr. Pei's plan was a gridiron concept. So ultimately, we more or less adopted Mr. Pei's plan because it provided greater planning flexibility and would be able to be built out over time and had a lot more opportunity to accommodate changing needs. And likewise, the master plan continued to develop in various iterations. The 2003 plan on the left and subsequent plan on the right shows the morphing of the park as well, from a smaller Marina City Park, as some of you may remember, to a much larger park, Gardens by the Bay, which eventually was around the whole Marina Channel, not just on the Marina South side, but also Marina East and Marina Center, to form a 100-hectare safeguarding for park and to, in a way, provide a destination for the public to enjoy. So really the planning of Marina Bay, beyond just being an opportunity to expand and extend the city center, was also about People's Bay, about providing a necklace of public attractions, including the gardens, to bring the public to the city center and give them a reason to enjoy and come down to the city to partake in all these public activities and events. And this is the Gardens by the Bay as we know it today. And I think we continue to try and create opportunities and events and activities to bring the public to the city. And the planning goes on, even though this was started in the late 60s into the 70s, we continue to plan and look at opportunities to refine the plan to develop it over time. So this is how we are taking a long-term perspective on unfolding the plan, and it's never static, it's always being refined and developed to accommodate different needs. And going ahead, sustainability remains a key feature of the planning that we do in all these different verticals that you see here, whether it's about introducing cleaner energy, electric vehicles, about green economy, resilient future, etc. And many initiatives, we work very closely with partner agencies to bring the sustainability approach to the land use planning and complement their efforts. So example is in terms of how we're closing the resource loops to strengthen the way that we are using our resources and transforming from a linear to a circular economy. So a quick example is Tuas Nexus, where it's an integrated waste management facility, water reclamation plant, and there's a lot of circularity in the use of the energy and the water, wastewater treatment, etc. In terms of the energy, we've also been stepping up to do a force switch to power Singapore. So not from past using natural gas, we are also looking at using a lot more solar, potentially tapping on regional power grids, as well as looking into low carbon alternatives. So all this need to be integrated into the land use planning. And planning with nature, despite our land constraints, parks and nature reserves are accorded high importance, and we have various nature reserves and nature areas that we've safeguarded. And we're trying to strengthen and safeguard ecological corridors between significant biodiversity areas to further reinforce and provide resilience for the nature areas and nature reserves that we safeguard. And these are complemented through integrated skyrise greenery with buildings and also local parks and park connectors. And speaking of park connectors, I think during the pandemic, we've seen how useful having park connectors is near our homes, that we can do recreational activities and extend beyond just no exercising in the nearby park in our area. And this idea of the park connector really started in 1991 concept plan, where the notion was to use the land next to road reserves and drainage reserves to link up our different parks and to give a larger experience for the greenery that we can enjoy. And today we're building on that concept, strengthening it with new introductions of projects like the rail corridor, the coast-to-coast trails, etc. So here's a zoom-in example of the southern ridges, where originally they were separate hill parks. You had Mount Faber, Teluk Blangah Hill Park, and they were all segregated or not terribly well used, because these are hill parks, and despite having a lot of residential developments at the foothill, not a lot of people went up to the parks, because when you got up to the park, you know, after you kind of went around the park, you had to come down to the foothills again. And that's why we decided to connect the parks together through the introduction of these footbridges that connect, and made it a much larger experience. So this is expanding on the concept of park connector, where you're using, in a way, strips of land to connect different things together, different parks together. So here we are connecting different hill parks together to give in its entirety, a 9-kilometer experience of a rich to rich kind of hill park experience. And I think what made this project special to me is that we took it further and not just introduced your standard overhead bridge kind of design. We decided that we needed to try and look for special designs, attractive designs, designs that can create a sense of place and identity, which is why we had a design competition and searched for good designs that could bring something special to the area. And I think today the public, many of us really enjoy this area, and also enjoy bringing our friends and family to these areas to take pictures and all that. So that kind of strengthens the whole sense of place of the area through design. And just now I talk about vertical greenery. So the vertical greenery, we have a program that supports the landscaping for high-rise buildings, and through a whole combination of requirements and incentives. And this has been a collaborative effort with the private sector and agencies. Today, we are in our Lush Guidelines version 3.0, and we have been able to refine the guidelines over time because of this collaboration to make the guidelines better and to, in a way, address the concerns and feedback that we get from the private sector and other agencies. And by now we have, the program has contributed some 250 hectares of greenery within various developments. and spread all across the island. So this serves to complement the sense of greenery that we can enjoy beyond our roadside planting and the park connectors. And as we move forward, we continue to try and incorporate climate resilience into our urban fabric, whether it's through looking at thermal comfort, how can we address urban heat island effect, what are the kind of effective solutions, ventilation, wind corridors, etc. These are many areas that we're studying beyond the engineering systems and solutions. And in Singapore, we really like this idea of trying to co-locate different users on the same spot, mainly because we're so land constrained. And I think it also adds to the attractiveness and the beauty of the area and allow the public to enjoy these facilities and understand the function of these facilities at the same time. So of course, a key example as shown in my opening slide is this development 3-in-1 MARINA barrage, which not just treats water, but also looks at flood control and is a lifestyle attraction and manages the reservoir water. And this is the latest Keppel Marina East, the desalination plant, which just opened quite recently. And this is 2-in-1 water supply in terms of water treatment and also a lifestyle attraction. What is great about this is that in a dry spell, it can take in seawater to treat seawater, desalinate, treat seawater. In rainy season, it can take water from the marina reservoir and treat that water at a much lower cost. So it's in a way a variable salinity plant. And also the public space it's sunk, the facilities are sunk to the basement so that the public space and the roof spaces can be enjoyed as it's situated right within East Coast Park. Now, COVID-19 has brought complex urban challenges, but also some opportunities for Singapore. I guess in some sense, there's a large scale, we've seen a large scale kind of change in activity patterns, and we're still trying to discern the long-term impact. For instance, for working from home, we've seen those who can work from home, a lot more have been doing so, and we can see the impact on the travel patterns as well as what is the future of the workspace. Of course, we're still having to, in a way, analyze and understand whether these are long-term sustained patterns, but it gives us the opportunity to see the impact on a much larger scale than if we did smaller pilots or if it happened more organically. And I think what we've kind of ascertained is that it does demonstrate the relevance of many of our existing key planning strategies and also identifies new opportunities for us to, in a way, have new impact and new designs. I think one thing it underlines is the importance of incorporating planning for resilience, as well as to cater for flexible buffer spaces to allow quick response to unexpected needs going forward. And as I mentioned, it also, in a way, underscores the appropriateness of some of the new strategies that we have introduced. In this example I'm showing you here, it is the CBD incentive scheme that we introduced as part of the Master Plan 2019, which provides incentives for older office developments to redevelop to more mixed-use development. And I think as shown in this more extensive work from home period, that having more mixed uses within the CBD will bode well for its future and provide a more resilient, dynamic place for live, work, and play. And introducing more planning flexibility is also going to give the industry more flexibility to adjust to different considerations. So here is an example on the left where we can see that conventional planning would have different land uses for different purposes. In this example, it is the beige one. It represents, say, educational institution in the example of Punggol Digital District. And in the teal color would be your standard industrial business park areas, But in the enterprise district approach, the users are allowed to more flexibly intermix and co-chair. So again, that provides more resilience and flexibility in the plans. And this is being adopted not just for Punggol Digital District, but also for Jurong Innovation District. And I think it also shows that having workplaces near home is very useful going forward. So it kind of reinforces the need to do polycenter development, whether it's Tampines Regional Hub or Jurong Lake District, etc. We need to grow opportunities for people to work near home and beyond the CBD. So these could be in the form of satellite offices or co-working spaces that people can tap on when they're not in their main HQ. And we are also increasingly planning with geospatial data and having a more data-rich environment to inform the planning. So in the past, more planning is done by rule of thumb, but going forward, and we have seen it in the past few years, that we've been able to tap on a lot more data to, in some sense, validate the plans that we've done. A quick example is Tampines Regional Center. The plans for Regional Center, the concept behind that has always been about providing places for people to work near their place of residence. But we've never been able to validate that, say 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. But now EasyLink data is easily available for us to analyze on an aggregate level. And we can see that for places like Tampines Regional Center, as well as Changi Business Park, more than half the people who work there are coming from the East region. So that in a way reinforces and validates the approach and the strategy. So we are also working with other data sets like analyzing the amenities, where these should be best located to serve residents. In the past, maybe your polyclinics are typically located one per town, just as a rule of thumb. But nowadays, we are able to aggregate the data, analyze where are people coming from for say, polyclinics. Are they coming from within the town itself, or is travel routing a stronger determinant of how people use these facilities? So this is giving us more information together with our partner agencies to better plan facilities as well. And having had that ability to mesh and put together geospatial data had also supported our COVID-19 response efforts because of the regular collaboration that we already had and the regular conversations and networks with the various stakeholders. We are able to amass information to provide information on space out and put this together to give people a sense of the crowd levels before people head out to some of these malls and facilities. So we were able to put that together quite quickly. And data is also useful for us to engage with stakeholders. So we have a common picture of the situation. And hopefully we are working towards more responsive and efficient planning processes armed with the data and having more precise and targeted planning solutions. And for sure, as we go forward to ensure that we are planning sustainably and for the long term, we are always looking for opportunities to, in a way, give ourselves the space and opportunity to continue to grow. So the move of the city terminals to Tuas and the relocation of Paya Lebar Air Base are all in that kind of vein and that strategy to free up opportunities for us to grow. So using planning to increase rather than restrict our strategic options in the long run. So I'm going to pause here and hand it back to Razvan, and I look forward to a good conversation with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I have so many questions. I could probably spend another couple of hours asking them, but I'm aware we only have about 20 minutes. So just a reminder to our audience, if you could use the Q&A box to submit your questions. Excuse me. Well, we'll try to get to as many as possible. But maybe to kick off this conversation, looking at your slideshow and obviously, knowing and living the Singapore reality, all of us here on this in this chat, it is without doubt a success story that cities around the world are trying to learn from, whether in terms of planning or investment or trade or policy. And of course, 2020, and especially even now in 2021, very different conditions altogether. So is there anything specific at this point in time that you would say this 50-year-long mindset of grit and resolve that is uniquely and directly relevant to the environmental challenges of today? What would be some of those very kind of unique points of learning that we can apply here and now?
Thanks, Razvan. Great question. What comes to mind is, as what I've shared in terms of the long-term approach. I think taking the long-term approach really gives us opportunity and that space and time to respond and react and make major moves. If we're talking about moving the city terminal, that's not a decision that can happen and evolve in, say, 5 years. So it's a conversation that took place over some decades, and the preparation for the receiving side also need to take 1 or 2 decades. So these are things that really are helped by doing it in the long term. But taking a long-term plan, long-term view, I would say, also doesn't mean that there's rigidity, because some people say, oh, you take a long-term view, then you're kind of stuck in a course of action. But I think what's also helpful in our approach is that we regularly revisit the plans, at least once in every 10 years for the long-term plan, once in every 5 years for the master plan, to revisit whether there are changing circumstances, new trends, new technology, new businesses, et cetera, that is emerging, and new needs from the community. So it's always about trying to find that balance point, as well as making options available for the long term, so that we have that flexibility to react and respond. So as we free up the city terminal, we are having that huge opportunity to kind of reimagine, replan that whole area. And that's giving us options. Making that move is something that needs long-term planning, but having free up the land, then we have that opportunity and flexibility to plan for that going forward. And I would just add another point before I stop, is that I think us having that opportunity to work together across different agencies with the stakeholders, with the community, that in a way, that habit of working regularly together, it has been very helpful for us to understand different perspectives, different considerations, and then being able to respond quite nimbly, I would say, during, say, this pandemic, where we needed to act quite quickly on, say, redesigning the expo for taking in the workers and serving as different type of facilities. Having that regular working arrangement with each other, that gives us the ability to respond quite quickly. I'll just stop there. Thanks.
It's a great answer. And I think one thing that comes to mind, I think a lot of people do think about Singapore in terms of this kind of overarching long-term planning, the broad strokes. And I think obviously we didn't need COVID to talk about agility, but agility is something that has to be part of our everyday life. And I'm curious to hear from you, how much room, and I understand it's hard to quantify, but how much is there left for these emerging patterns and course adjusting along the way? And I'm curious to find out about perhaps specific areas where this flexible adaptability has to be built into the urban environment by design, so it can actually enable this resilient long-term planning to even happen.
Yeah, thanks, Razvan. I think the kind of agility happens in my mind at probably 3 levels. One is process. So I talked about the process of that regular working together, which gives us the opportunity to understand different perspectives and respond nimbly. So that's process. Then I'm also thinking there's also policy-wise, how we're giving ourselves flexibility to make adjustments as things change. So 2 quick examples. One is the approach that we sell land on a leasehold basis, that there's opportunity to then replan and reimagine different areas. And another policy kind of example would be, just now I shared about the enterprise district, how we are trying to give more flexibility to mix and match and kind of move users around, not just on the parcel level, which is what white site zoning provides, but also on a district level where the master developer can then make the adjustment on the district level. So that's just 2 quick examples. And then I think plan-wise, one would be, freeing up large tracts of land, like how we're seeing in the city terminals and Greater Southern Waterfront in general, that it's giving us that opportunity to replan. But on actual precinct-wise, like district-wise, like Marina Bay, I shared about the grid system, and the grid system gives a lot of flexibility to kind of compose the parcels in different ways. So we were able to fit in something very large, like the Marina Bay Sands Integrated Resort, and much smaller developments could also be fit into the grid as we parcel it, and depending on the development needs of the day. Yeah. So, but at the kind of development level, I would think even repurposing of, you've seen some of the HDB now, the multi-story car park is being repurposed as urban farms. So as new needs emerge, I think we have enough flexibility in the infrastructure to be able to meet some of these new opportunities and needs, just as we've seen in, say, the conversion of the Expo and other vacant old school buildings and all that were converted to different facilities, whether it's testing center, vaccination center, etc. So having some flex in the city gives us the opportunity to either test bed kind of new and interesting users, or to, in a way, put these buildings into commission as emergency kind of new users that emerge, because every challenge of the day is different in complexion. So we do want to make sure we have that flexibility.
And I think something that you were talking about just now, that notion of regenerative design, is resonating with quite a few people. Quite a few questions asked around that. So I will try my best to combine some of them and really perhaps go to a notion that is close to my interest, which is that of design evidence, and looking at the way we make these decisions. How do we retain, how do you convert, and where do you use that elasticity that you spoke about? But I'm curious if there are any specific learning points from the ongoing pandemic as they relate to the built environment that either gave you a chance to test that things are working as intended, whether it is in the planning or even as the current stock that is built, or it started to kind of highlight areas where we actually may be able to innovate, whether through regenerative design or through reprogramming some of the uses or neighborhoods.
I thought what was interesting during the pandemic, interesting, quote unquote, was that actually our neighborhood stood up very well. I think most of us during circuit breaker found that a lot of amenities were quite within easy reach of where we stayed. Whether it's the grocery store or whether it's the neighborhood park. They were, there's so much talk about 15-minute city and whatnot, but actually our neighborhoods were, to some extent, already that and very convenient for that purpose. So I thought our neighborhood stood up well in that regard. But where maybe the gap would be how do we then introduce places for people to be able to work near home? Because even for those of us who can work from home, not all of us would have conducive environments at home to work from. maybe there are just too many of us trying to work from home at the same time, and no death of the open plan. Everybody had too much open plan going on. So in any case, how do we then provide these spaces for people around the neighborhood? Is there opportunity to introduce work pods or co-working spaces nearer the neighborhoods, whether it's in the community buildings, like your libraries, your CCs, and we have seen some of that. Sengkang CC has a very nice co-working space. And we've also even seen some work pods being introduced in some of the malls like North Point and all that, which has been very popular. And so I believe that going forward, we will need to identify more opportunities for introducing some of these facilities, as well as also re-examining some of the norms that we had for, say, some of these facilities and amenities near us, whether there was an adequate provision or whether we need to step up a little bit on that. So I think the bones are there, but we may need to massage and tweak some of these things so that they perform better going forward.
And I think a related question, great question coming from the audience, is also around something that you highlighted, which is the nature of work has changed. Well, it has been steadily changing for 10 years. It feels like we refused to respond to it. We were, in a sense, we didn't need a pandemic to shove us in our homes to realize that we can work in a much more agile way and have these conversations online. But the question is really interesting because it's looking not necessarily at the results of the pandemic and the changes in technology on the impact on the way we work, but looking at the impact of a new decentralized model onto the urban fabric, where perhaps roads could be converted to bike lanes or pedestrianized, or parks can have a very different way of being connecting the tissue of the neighborhoods. The question is whether URA is looking at this as a sort of a proactive shift in response to some of the signs collecting during the pandemic.
Well, in terms, I think ultimately people are still social creatures and like to get together. So even if we don't need to regularly go into the office, I think quite a lot of us enjoyed phase 3, where we were back in the office seeing our old colleagues, like 1 year older, like what happened, new hairstyle, like so that getting together, it's what a lot of people value at the workplace. And also as a city, I think Singapore, we still want to be a hub, and we want the power of the agglomeration to be effective as a draw of people, business travelers and whatnot. So how do we still, in that sense, capture the magic of the city center as the office space transform? Some people are saying, office space going forward may be less about individual work, but a lot more about coming together for collaborative work. Some people say the CBD going forward is really the central experiential district, where you come and enjoy the arts and sights and sounds and the F&B and whatnot. So I think the policies that we have put in place, whether it's CBD incentive and further attention to urban design, I think that's going to put us in a good position going forward to enable and facilitate the transformation of the city center to remain attractive, even as the nature of the work change. And then specifically about whether, about road spaces to bike lanes, that's something that LTA and us were actively studying, and LTA had put out a recent contract to look into converting certain lanes. But those of you who drive may realize that in phase 3, actually traffic was pretty bad. So, we also still have to make sure we calibrate, even as we want more people to be in public transport or working from home, or, just doing active mobility. We also need to see what is the actual longer term impact of the shifts, whether these are permanent shifts or are they temporary shifts, because we have seen in some cities that a lot more people are going back in the office on a regular basis. I mean, like, for example, in China, in Shanghai, everybody's back in the office. So we are still waiting to see, but LTA is already starting to transform some of the lanes into transit lanes. And we hope that with some of these experimentations, we will get people more used to that. And we hope to build a stronger network for active mobility.
Mm. And I'll probably ask one last question, trying to summarize a few others, and then we can allow Dr. Hossain to wrap up today's session. And this one, I think, quite a bit of interest in the nature part of our kind of natural built environment. And speaking of a large city, obviously it's so often represented through images of buildings whose exteriors are covered in greenery. And I'm curious to hear more about URA's priorities regarding how do you design these buildings from the inside out for experience, something that you touched on, and what could be some of the various incentives that may contribute to it. And of course, we spoke about the workplace quite a bit that is challenged in the current pandemic. Can we embed nature and wellness even deeper into our buildings in a way that would make them yet again focused on the experience and diversity of experience?
Certainly, that's an area that we will be keen to look at. And I think it goes beyond greenery. It's also about ventilation, other aspects, the air quality, etc., of the well building. So that's something we are very keen to partner the industry and work to refine the current guidelines. And we also have to see where the balance lie in terms of providing guidelines and incentives. Because malls provide atriums, but it doesn't mean atrium is all GFA exempted. So some things would need to come as part of the development, as part of a quality development. Some things we for sure we will look to incentivize, but we want to have a conversation in industry. And as Razvan, as you said, it needs to be data driven so that we understand what are the guidelines and initiatives that will result in better quality built environment, whether it's ventilation, air quality, and the general well-being of the users of the building.
Great, thank you very much. It's been great speaking to you, and I think you closed on a word that will make Dr. Hossain really happy: data. He really likes it. And on that note, I would like to thank also everyone who has sent their questions. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to get to all of them, but I'm sure there will be many more opportunities to talk through these topics. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. That just gives me 1 minute to thank again Yu-Ning for accepting our invitation and for a great presentation. The amount of questions in the question box is they're still coming through, and I was amazed how Razvan managed them. But you're still sort of 7 behind, Razvan. You need to do better next time. Beautiful questions on wildlife, on regenerative design, retention of existing buildings, etc., which are coming through. But some of these as with previous sessions, some of these we prepare answers and put it on the YouTube channel, where the recording of this session will be loaded up. So there is still chance to get those answers. But thank you very much again, Yu-Ning and Razvan, for a fantastic moderation of a beautiful session. Our next session in July, we have our landscape colleagues, 2 of the most prolific landscape consultants in Singapore will be sharing their views with us on their work and integration of the environment with the work. With that, I wish everyone a good evening, good day, good week, and see you in 2 weeks, 2 months' time. Thank you.
5 p.m. on the dot. Thank you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.